The first memory Selah kept of the old world was not a sound, but a shadow. She'd been 7 when the sky split into arcs of invisible thunder, weapons that tore through cities by shredding the inner ear, liquefying nerves that once carried lullabies, sirens, song. In silence, she watched her mother's lips shape a scream she could no longer hear. The ground rippled like water, windows powdered into dust, and everything that relied on sound, phones, alarms, pleas, passed away. 17 years later, the shatter wave was a lesson written on every ruined skyline. Survivors moved through hollow streets glazed with moss and memory, and their hands spoke more than their mouths. Some still possessed faint snatches of hearing, ghost tones like distant bells, but most were profoundly deaf. New languages blossomed in their palms, and on their skin, a different alphabet pulsed, vibrational tattoos, inked with magnetite filaments and luminous bacteria that fed on the body's heat. Selah's tattoos began at her wrists, spiraling up her forearms in a braid of lines and dots. When she pressed 2 fingers to a segment, the filaments quivered, transmitting a coded tremor into her bones. To another tattooed person, the signal arrived as a gentle thrumming under their skin, a private telegram humming in the dark. It was cleaner than sign language in tight quarters, and safer than lantern flash where raiders might lurk. But the tattoos carried another secret. Introduced by a pre-collapse bioartist called Haruki Morn, the living ink held spores that brightened whenever 2 pulses synchronized in a particular harmonic, an ancient pattern indistinguishable from what poets once called love. The glow was faint, visible only in dusk or deep shade, yet enough to paint confession upon flesh. No one could fake it for long. Affection, desire, tenderness, whatever shape the feeling took, would nudge the spores into radiant bloom. In the settlement of Low Water, stilted over the remains of Seattle's flooded outskirts, love glow had become both blessing and nuisance. Children giggled at sudden flickers between teenage wrists. Elders recounted marriage vows verified by bioluminescent proof. And for all its softness, the glow sometimes cost lives. If raiders spotted it during night patrols, they tracked the unwary like fireflies. Selah, 24 now, kept her sleeves rolled low. Not because she feared raiders, she carried a bolt rifle and could outclimb most watchmen, but because she mistrusted the glow's honesty. Affection once destroyed her mother. The woman had run back into collapsing apartments to retrieve a husband already gone. Selah told herself that love was a liability. Better to survive on skill and caution. Better to keep her tattoos dark. She was grinding maize in the communal mill when Elder Mira summoned her. The old woman's hair, braided with sea glass, framed eyes sharp enough to carve marble. She signed briskly. Jace returned. Needs you. Selah's heart stumbled. Jace Morrow had left Lowwater half a year earlier, guiding a scavenger crew to the eastern tech vaults. He was famous for 2 things: uncanny aim with a spearcaster, and a silence deeper than deafness, as though the shatter wave had erased not only sound, but much of his former self. Selah once tried calling him friend, but the word felt thin. Their bond lived in repaired nets, shared rations, night patrols crouched above tide foam, where their pulses tapped stories only they knew. She wiped flour from her hands and followed Mira to the infirmary, a tent stretched over warped planks. Jace lay on a cot, trousers torn at the thigh, auburn beard ragged. The medics had removed shrapnel but could not replace what else he'd lost: 3 teammates and most of his faith. When his eyelids fluttered open, he found Selah and exhaled relief that vibrated through their overlapping shadows. He lifted a shaky arm. The tattoos along his wrist blinked, first dull, then bright. Need help. Sella touched her own markings until her answer throbbed against his forearm. Here. Later. As dusk bled lavender across the drowned streets, Jace explained by candle flicker. Raiders, yes, but not ordinary human marauders. These wielded resonance weapons, crude cousins of the shatterwave bombs, powered by scavenged audio coils. They called themselves the Choir, and took delight in furthering the world's muteness. Jace's team had found evidence they were stockpiling capacitors in the old hydro dam east of the Cascades. If left unchallenged, the Choir could rebuild a city-scale sonic cannon. Sella felt a chill as she pictured Low-Water's stilt homes splintering under invisible storms. She asked why he'd returned alone. He signed with a tremor. Others captured. Ransom or labor. Need energy cells. Low-Water's council had batteries enough for lights and water pumps, but not to barter with zealots. Yet there was a rumor. Old files whispered of an experimental geothermal station beneath Mount Baker. Never looted, because the tunnels were clogged with toxic mist. If they could reach it and haul back fuel cores, they might ransom the captives or power defensive dampeners to block further sonic attacks. Council had no spare scouts, but Sella and Jace were both stubborn and half in love with impossible odds, even if neither admitted it aloud. They left at dawn, paddling a narrow skiff along flooded avenues where salmon darted between crumbling traffic lights. Overhead, gulls circled like punctuation marks on the story of ruin. Jace's leg was stiff but usable. He tied a splint of carbon fiber to brace it and refused Sella's offer to row alone. They made camp that night on the shell of a department store roof, now an island reef spangled with barnacles. Over freeze-dried lentils they conversed in pulses and soft sign. Sela told him of new seedlings in Low-Water's rooftop gardens, of a child born last month, who laughed though none could hear it, mouth opening on silent delight. Jace listened, letting her stories mend fractures behind his ribs. Around midnight, a cloud bank swallowed the moon. Sella felt restless and wandered the rooftop perimeter. When she returned, Jace was studying his wrist, frowning. The ink along his ulna glimmered, then winked out when she stepped closer. She swallowed. "We're wasting body heat," she signed, pulling her blanket beside him. They lay back to back for warmth, trading miniature vibrations instead of lullabies, until fatigue claimed them. In the morning, they hiked inland where channels of melted asphalt led toward green hills. Forest had reclaimed highways, ferns arching through engine blocks, saplings bursting from shattered dashboards. Silence here was profound, a cathedral of absence, broken only by tremors of wind they felt on skin rather than heard. They communicated constantly, but not about the glow. Coordinates, weather, caution signs. Stay low, Ice Scout Ridge, water near, rest. At twilight, while Jace gathered fungus for soup, Sella caught her reflection in a puddle and saw faint turquoise pulses grazing her wrists. She plunged hands into cold water until the light subsided. Part of her wanted to believe the ink malfunctioned. Another part feared it spoke truth. On the fourth day, they reached Mount Baker's foothills. Snowmelt sluiced through gullies, hissing vibrations across loose shale. The geothermal entrance yawned behind a collapsed visitor center. Warning placards, once bright yellow, were rusted to lace. Toxic mist still spiraled from the shaft, heavy with sulfur dioxide. Masks were mandatory. They carried 2 rebreathers scavenged from a hospital, filters half expired. Inside, the tunnels sweated heat. Walls dripped mineral tears. The map Sella downloaded from a pre-collapsed tablet glitched, but signage in glow paint pointed downward. Generators, dormant but intact, lined the main chamber like sleeping giants. With luck, battery racks in the sublevel might still hold charge. Geothermal power could trickle through for decades if systems were sealed. As they descended a switchback staircase, vibrations changed. Not purely seismic, but rhythmic, almost musical. She felt them first against her boots, then through her sternum. Thump, pause, as though the mountain itself possessed a pulse. They rounded a bend and found the source. A choir platoon, wiring resonant amplifiers to the geothermal turbines. A dozen men and women in patchwork armor, some brandishing bone-handled hammers whose shafts hummed. Cables snaked toward a cylindrical weapon, braced on tripods. Small compared to city killers, but vicious enough to flatten settlements. Sella ducked behind a slag pile, heart booming so hard her tattoos flickered. Jace crouched beside her, eyes like shards of black ice. He signed, "Small numbers, disrupt power core." She hesitated. If they blew the generators, geothermal energy would die, along with any hope of bargaining chips. Yet letting the choir keep the weapon was unthinkable. She lifted her sleeve. Their wrists touched, ink to ink. He felt her question before she tapped it. "Can we steal cells, then destroy coil?" He nodded, relief widening his features. The plan formed in vibrations too swift for speech. Create diversion near coolant vents. Slip to battery bank. Overload capacitors and weapon. Escape. They split. Sella scaled maintenance scaffolding, light as a wisp, until she reached a rusted valve. She cracked it open. Scalding steam burst outward, singing across the chamber like a dragon's breath. Instantly, alarms, silent to her, flashed red strobes. Choir members scrambled. Amid chaos, Jace limped to the battery racks, using pillars as cover. He unplugged 2 fuel cores and strapped them into a carbon sling across his back. Then he crept toward the weapon's emitter, a cone of copper petals. He jammed a screwdriver into its frequency dial, twisting until the calibrations danced into lethal feedback. But a sentry caught the motion. The guard swung a hammer that vibrated the air, a pressure wave Sella felt even 40 meters away. She saw Jace fling up an arm. The wave hurled him to the floor. Without thinking, she vaulted down ladders, landing behind the guard. Her rifle butt cracked against his helmet, sending him sprawling. Another choir soldier charged. She rolled beneath a swinging rod, fired her last bolt into their knee. Across the chamber, warning lights intensified. Overloaded capacitors wailed, a bellow no survivor could hear. But the floor trembled in agony. Sella yanked Jace upright. They stumbled toward an auxiliary elevator, slammed the control lever. Gears groaned, lifting them as white plasma blossomed below. The sonic weapon imploded, tearing copper petals into shrapnel that ricocheted harmlessly under the rising platform. Generators blew sequentially, flooding the shaft with blue fire. The elevator shuddered to a halt near the surface. Smoke leaked around warped doors. Jace's mask hung cracked. Blood dripped from his ear, though he had no hearing left to lose. They emerged into frigid evening, where snowflakes hissed on their hot gear. Outside the blast radius, they collapsed beside a basalt outcrop. For a long while, they simply breathed. Then Sella noticed their wrists, brighter than she'd ever seen, a shimmering corona pulsing in perfect rhythm. No longer faint turquoise, but molten gold. She raised her arm, astonished. The glow lit Jace's weary face. He lifted his hand to sign, but stopped. Words felt small. Instead, he pressed his glowing wrist to hers, letting the synchronized hum say everything. And because honesty had never been clearer, she leaned forward and kissed the scar on his cheek. She felt his answering tremor, a soft quake along the fault lines of fear she'd carried all her life. At dawn, they started home. Fuel cores intact in Jace's sling. Mountain air tasted of ash and promise. As sunlight warmed inked skin, the glow faded to a quiet ember. Still there, still undeniable. 2 days out from low water, they encountered the choir remnants blocking a canyon path. 10 fighters, bruised but furious, set resonant hammers against cliff walls. Jace nudged Sella's shoulder, pointed to a narrow scree slope where a landslide waited for the right push. Together, they scaled it. She wedged a stolen pressure charge beneath overhanging boulders. Timing mattered. When the choir advanced, she signaled. Jace detonated the charge. Rocks tumbled, sealing the pass. The enemy would need weeks to carve a new route. That night, by a creek, Sella finally spoke, actually spoke, letting voice vibrate though she could not sense its tone. I used to think love was a liability. The words felt strange, shaped by muscle memory more than hearing. Jace watched her lips, then responded with vibrations against her palm. Survival without love. Empty. She laughed, a voiceless gust, and replied in pulses. Maybe I'm ready for full. When they reached low water, bells they couldn't hear rang anyway. Someone cranked the old brass ship's bells in tradition. Children dashed along planks, chasing echoes they imagined. Council members embraced the returning scouts, eyes widening at the fuel cores. With these, they could power sonic dampeners, protect trade routes, and perhaps rescue Jace's captured friends. Mira clasped their glowing wrists, tears prisming the sunlight. In the weeks that followed, engineers rigged the cores into crystalline shields that warped incoming sound into harmless ripple. Raids lessened. Low water's gardens spread across new rooftops. And at night, lovers watched their tattoos shimmer across hammocks, a galaxy spun by heartbeats. Sella took up teaching at the signal school, instructing children to read bone code vibrations. Jace led recovery teams into hinterlands, now carrying a small transmitter tuned to Sella's frequency. If she pulsed twice, he felt it no matter the distance, like a meteor brushing his wrist. One evening near the solstice, they stood atop the tide gate where phosphorescent plankton swirled below. Sella's mother's locket, rescued years ago, hung at her throat. She pressed it into Jace's hands. He opened it. Inside, a scrap of pre-apocalypse lullaby, illegible ink smeared by time. They couldn't read the melody, much less hear it. Yet something of its cadence lingered between them, vibrating through memory itself. Their tattoos responded, glowing so bright the plankton seemed dull. Around them, other night fishermen glanced up and smiled, not at sound, but at light. The world had ended once by noise. It was being rebuilt now by color, by tremor, by touch. In a journal, Sella began that night. She wrote in careful strokes, "We are not the silence left behind, but the music we invent inside our skin." And in years to come, when new children asked how their city survived the second storm, and why some people's arms shone like captured dawn, elders would tell the tale. They described 2 scouts who found power inside a mountain, but more importantly, found each other. Their glow became the settlement's North Star, proof that love, once thought a liability, was the frequency strong enough to outsing any weapon, audible or not. Sometimes at dusk, Sella traced the braid of dots along her forearm, and felt them answer with soft vibration, as if saying, "Yes, I remember." Jace, returning from patrol, would touch his wrist to hers. No words exchanged, none needed. Around them, low water's stilt homes creaked a gentle percussion. Waves beat muted drums against pylons, and high above, wind wrote silent chorales across steel bones of skyscrapers. The world would never again be as it was before the shatter wave. But in the hush that followed apocalypse, humanity had learned to speak through skin, to trust the modest radiance that bloomed whenever two heartbeats aligned. It was enough. It was everything.